Tracy's eyes snapped open to an unsettling quiet. Something was wrong. The usual morning sounds, Brooklyn's giggles, the patter of small feet on the hardwood floors, or even the soft humming of her 6-year-old daughter playing with her toys, were absent. The silence pressed against her ears like a heavy blanket. "Brooklyn," she called out, her voice still rough from sleep. No response. The digital clock on her nightstand showed 6:47 a.m., early enough that Brooklyn should still be in bed. Tracy swung her legs over the side of the bed, her heart beginning to pick up pace. The hallway stretched before her, morning light filtering through the windows, casting long shadows on the walls. Brooklyn's bedroom door stood slightly ajar, exactly as it had been when Tracy had kissed her goodnight. "Sweetie, are you awake?" Tracy pushed the door open wider, expecting to see her daughter's tousled brown hair peeking out from under her favorite unicorn blanket. Instead, she found an empty bed, the covers thrown back haphazardly. Brooklyn's stuffed Olaf, from Frozen, lying face down on the floor. The first tendrils of panic began to wrap around Tracy's chest. She moved faster now, checking the bathroom, the playroom, calling Brooklyn's name with increasing urgency. Each empty room amplified her fear until she reached the kitchen and stopped dead in her tracks. The back door was open, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. "No, no, no," Tracy whispered, running to the door. She hadn't locked it last night. How could she have forgotten to lock it? The morning air bit at her bare arms as she rushed into the backyard, her feet cold against the dewy grass. "Brooklyn!" Her voice echoed across the quiet suburban street. A few neighbors' lights flickered on, curious faces appearing in windows. Tracy ran to the front yard, scanning the street in both directions. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she sprinted down the sidewalk, still in her pajamas, feet bare against the rough concrete. In the distance, she heard it, the familiar rumble of the garbage truck making its Tuesday morning rounds. And then she saw it, a flash of pink and purple fabric, the corner of Brooklyn's favorite unicorn pajamas, disappearing around the corner. "Wait!" Tracy screamed, running faster than she ever had. Her feet stung against the pavement, but she couldn't stop. Neighbors were emerging from their houses now, startled by her cries. The garbage truck's hydraulic whine grew louder as Tracy rounded the corner, her lungs burning. She could see it now, the massive green vehicle moving methodically down the street, its mechanical arm lifting bins with practiced precision. Mrs. Peterson from number 42 was out in her robe, staring at Tracy with concern. But Tracy couldn't stop to explain. She had to reach that truck. Her daughter had to be there. The alternative was unthinkable. She pushed herself harder, ignoring the pain in her feet, the stitch in her side, the morning air burning in her lungs. The truck was 2 houses ahead now. Tracy could make out the driver's shape in the side mirror. Delvar, the friendly garbage collector, who always waved to Brooklyn. He hadn't noticed anything unusual yet, continuing his routine with mechanical efficiency. Neighbors were starting to gather on their lawns, pointing and talking. Some looked worried, others suspicious of the woman running barefoot after the garbage truck in her pajamas. Tracy didn't care what they thought. All that mattered was reaching that truck. Through her tears and the blinding morning sun, Tracy caught a glimpse of movement in the truck's loading area. Something shifted among the bags and bins, something that could have been a small figure in unicorn pajamas, but disappeared too quickly in the shadows of the compactor. The truck's hydraulic arm descended again, lifting another bin. Tracy's heart nearly stopped as she watched more garbage tumble into the dark maw of the compactor. Her bare feet slapped against the pavement, each step sending shocks of pain through her legs. But she pressed on. "Stop! Please stop!" she screamed, her voice breaking with desperation. A young couple jogging nearby changed direction, running toward her with concerned expressions. The woman reached out to grab Tracy's arm, but she yanked it away, never breaking stride. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The male jogger called out, now running alongside her. "Do you need help?" "My daughter," Tracy gasped between breaths. "My daughter, the truck, Brooklyn." More neighbors were emerging now, some in bathrobes, others dressed for work. Mr. Rodriguez from the corner house stepped into his front yard, phone in hand, already dialing. Tracy could hear him saying something about the police, but it was all background noise to the blood rushing in her ears. The sun had risen higher, its glare reflecting off the truck's metal surface, momentarily blinding her. Tracy stumbled, her knees scraping the ground, but she pushed herself up immediately. She couldn't lose sight of the truck. Not now. Delvar was checking his side mirror again, his brow furrowed as he noticed the commotion behind his vehicle. The truck's brakes squealed as he began to slow down, finally aware that something was wrong. Tracy's lungs were on fire, her throat raw from screaming. The distance between her and the truck was closing, but not fast enough. Every second felt like an eternity. Every movement of the hydraulic arm, a potential disaster. Through the chaos, she caught another glimpse of movement in the truck's shadowy interior. Something shifted among the garbage bags, and in the growing morning light, Tracy could have sworn she saw a flash of pink and purple fabric disappearing into the depths of the compactor. Tracy's lungs burned as she sprinted after the garbage truck, her bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. Each step sent jolts of pain through her legs, but she couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Her daughter could be in that truck, and nothing else mattered. In the driver's seat, Delvar Dobson noticed unusual movement in his rearview mirror. A woman was running after his truck, her hair wild and her pajamas disheveled. At first, he thought it was just another resident trying to catch him before he left their street, but something about her desperate pace made him uneasy. "Stop! Please stop!" Tracy screamed, her voice growing hoarse. A group of early morning joggers turned to stare, and an elderly man stepped into her path. "Hold on there, young lady," he said, attempting to block her. "What do you think you're doing?" "My daughter," Tracy gasped, trying to sidestep him. "She's missing. The truck, please." The elderly man reached for her arm, but Tracy twisted away, nearly losing her balance. Behind her, she could hear voices of confusion and concern spreading through the neighborhood. A woman in a business suit pulled out her phone, likely calling the police. A group of teenagers waiting for their school bus seemed to grasp the urgency of the situation. Without hesitation, they dropped their backpacks and began running alongside Tracy. "We'll help you catch it," one boy called out, his long legs quickly outpacing her. Delvar had slowed the truck at an intersection, the grinding of the hydraulics momentarily drowning out the commotion behind him. Something wasn't right. He'd been driving this route for years, and he'd never seen anything like this. The frantic woman's reflection in his mirror grew larger as she finally gained ground. He pulled the truck to a complete stop and climbed down from the cabin. The woman, Tracy, nearly collapsed against the side of the vehicle, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "My daughter, Brooklyn, 6 years old. Have you seen her?" she panted, already moving toward the back of the truck. Delvar's heart dropped. "A child? In my truck?" He immediately began checking the collection compartment, though he knew the implications were terrifying. By now, a small crowd had gathered. The teenagers who had helped Tracy catch up stood guard, keeping other onlookers at bay. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Some joined in the search, peering between garbage bags and calling out Brooklyn's name. The distant wail of police sirens grew closer as Delvar and Tracy searched desperately through the morning's collection. Each bag they moved aside increased Tracy's panic. Where was Brooklyn? The piece of unicorn pajama she'd seen, had it been her imagination? "I checked the hopper after every stop," Delvar said, his voice tight with concern. "I haven't seen anything unusual, but we need to be thorough." Tracy's hands trembled as she pushed aside another bag. The sirens grew louder, and blue lights reflected off the truck's metal surface. The first police car pulled up to the scene, and an officer stepped out, quickly assessing the situation. Delvar turned to the officer, his face etched with worry. "I'm the driver. We're looking for a missing girl who might have..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too horrible to voice. Tracy slumped against the truck, tears streaming down her face. The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, their whispered conversations creating a buzz of concern and speculation. Some had already started organizing their own search parties, spreading out into the surrounding streets. As the police began taking statements and coordinating with dispatch, a neighbor from 3 houses down approached the group, his face uncertain. "I saw something earlier," he said, drawing everyone's attention. "A small figure running toward the park. I thought it was one of the Williams kids, but I'm not sure now." Tracy's head snapped up, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "What time? Which direction exactly?" The neighbor pointed down Cedar Street, toward the old playground. "Just before sunrise. Couldn't make out much in the dark, but they were moving quick, heading toward the swings." More police cars arrived, their lights painting the morning street in alternating red and blue. An officer was already coordinating with dispatch to send units to the park, while another began taking detailed notes from Tracy about Brooklyn's appearance and what she'd been wearing. Delvar stood quietly for a moment, his mind racing through his morning route. He'd started at 5:30 a.m., just before dawn, and the park was his third stop. If Brooklyn had been following his truck... "The park gate is usually locked at that hour," he said suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. "But there's a gap in the fence behind the maintenance shed. The local kids use it all the time." One of the teenagers who had helped chase the truck spoke up. "He's right. We cut through there on the way to school sometimes." Tracy was already moving, her bare feet forgotten as she started toward Cedar Street. A police officer gently caught her arm. "Ma'am, please let us coordinate the search. We have units on the way to the park." "That's my baby," Tracy choked out, trying to pull away. "I can't just stand here." Delvar stepped forward, removing his safety vest. "I know every inch of that park from my route. Let me help. I can show the officers the gap in the fence and all the places where a child might hide." The lead officer nodded, quickly organizing search teams. Neighbors volunteered to check their properties and security cameras. The teenagers offered to spread the word through their social media networks. Within minutes, what had started as a desperate chase had transformed into a coordinated community effort. As Tracy climbed into a police car with Delvar and 2 officers, she clutched a piece of unicorn pajama she'd found near the truck. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the suburban streets. In the distance, dark clouds were gathering, threatening rain. A neighbor from across the street approached the police car just before it pulled away. "Earlier this morning, I saw a small figure running toward the park," he said, uncertainty clear in his voice. "But I can't be completely sure if it was Brooklyn." The police car's sirens pierced the morning air as 3 patrol vehicles pulled up to the scene. Officer Sarah Martinez stepped out first, her experienced eyes quickly scanning the area where Tracy stood trembling next to Delvar's garbage truck. The community had already started gathering, concerned neighbors forming small clusters, speaking in hushed tones. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to focus," Officer Martinez said, placing a steady hand on Tracy's shoulder. "When exactly was the last time you saw Brooklyn?" Tracy's voice quivered as she spoke. "Last night when I tucked her in, she was wearing her favorite unicorn pajamas. I forgot to lock the back door." The revelation made her knees weak, and Delvar quickly offered support. "It's not your fault," he said firmly, then turned to the officer. "I know these streets better than anyone. My route takes me through every corner of this neighborhood. If she followed my truck, there are only so many places she could have gone." Dark clouds began rolling in from the west, casting ominous shadows over the search party that was rapidly forming. The police had already dispatched additional units, and volunteers from the neighborhood were organizing into groups, armed with flashlights and determination. Delvar pulled out his route map, spreading it across the hood of a police car. "I started at Oak Street today," he explained, tracing his finger along the paper. "Made my way down Maple, then turned onto Cherry Lane. That's when I first noticed something wasn't right." The first drops of rain began to fall, creating small dark spots on the map. Tracy wrapped her arms around herself, her thin morning robe offering little protection against the increasingly cold wind. A kind neighbor draped a jacket over her shoulders. "We need to move quickly," Officer Martinez announced, addressing the growing crowd. "The rain will wash away any tracks or evidence. Split into teams of 4. Check every yard, every bush, every possible hiding place." As the groups dispersed, Delvar remembered something. "Wait," he called out, his voice cutting through the patter of rainfall. "Last Thursday, Brooklyn was watching the truck from her driveway. She seemed fascinated by the hydraulic lift. She asked me so many questions about how it worked." Tracy's eyes widened with recognition. She's been talking about garbage trucks all week, drawing pictures of them. I thought it was just a new phase. The rain was getting heavier now, reducing visibility and adding urgency to their search. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the teams moved methodically through the neighborhood, calling Brooklyn's name against the growing storm. A shout came from the direction of the playground. "Over here! I found something!" Tracy ran toward the voice, her bare feet splashing through puddles, ignoring the cold and wet. Near the entrance to the old playground, partially protected by an overhanging tree, were small footprints in the mud. The distinctive pattern of Brooklyn's favorite light-up sneakers was unmistakable. "These are fresh," Officer Martinez confirmed, studying the tracks. "They can't be more than an hour old." Delvar, who had followed closely behind, noticed something else. The playground gate, usually locked at this hour, was slightly ajar. His eyes narrowed as he studied the area, years of observation kicking in. Something about the way the chain hung loose suggested it had been recently disturbed. The search intensified around the playground area. Tracy's heart pounded as she recognized a familiar pink hair ribbon caught on a bush near the swing set. The rain was now coming down in sheets, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. "The gazebo," Delvar suddenly said, his voice carrying over the storm. "Kids often hide there to watch the trucks go by. It's their secret spot." The group changed direction, heading toward the white wooden structure barely visible through the downpour. The sound of emergency vehicles continued in the background, a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation. Tracy clutched Brooklyn's hair ribbon tightly in her fist, silently praying. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and the thunder was getting closer. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, each step both hopeful and terrifying. As they approached the gazebo, a faint but familiar sound drifted through the rain, barely audible over the storm. The distant notes of a children's song echoed weakly through the rain, coming from somewhere nearby. Tracy froze, her body tensing as she strained to hear through the rainfall. The melody was unmistakable, the opening notes of "Let It Go" playing faintly somewhere ahead. Delvar recognized it too, his face lighting up with understanding. "That's her song," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "She was humming it last week when she watched the truck." The group moved forward cautiously, not wanting to startle Brooklyn if she was nearby. The gazebo emerged more clearly through the rain, its white paint gleaming despite the gloomy weather. Officer Martinez motioned for the other searchers to spread out, creating a loose perimeter around the structure. The music grew slightly louder as they approached, though still muffled by the storm. Tracy's heart raced as she took the steps up to the gazebo's platform, her movements slow and deliberate. Water dripped from the ornate roof, creating a curtain of rainfall around the structure. Delvar stayed close behind, his usual cheerful face etched with concern. The wooden floorboards creaked under their weight, each sound amplified by the tension of the moment. The interior of the gazebo was shadowy, but there, in the furthest corner, a small shape was barely visible. Through the darkness, they could make out the familiar pattern of unicorn pajamas, now wet and muddy. Brooklyn sat curled up, her mother's phone clutched in her hands, the source of the music that had led them to her. Tracy's breath caught in her throat. After hours of desperate searching, after imagining every terrible possibility, there was her daughter, alive and whole. She took another step forward, careful not to move too quickly. "Brooklyn," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The small figure looked up, and in that moment, time seemed to stand still. Brooklyn's eyes, wide and frightened, met her mother's, and the phone slipped from her hands, the music cutting off abruptly. The silence that followed was broken only by the steady drumming of rain on the gazebo's roof, and the distant rumble of thunder moving away to the east. The rain pounded mercilessly against the pavement when Delver's head suddenly jerked up. Through the downpour, a familiar melody drifted in the air, the unmistakable tune of "Let It Go" from Frozen. His heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the sound, raindrops streaming down his face. "Listen," he shouted over the storm. "That's from Frozen." Tracy's eyes widened with recognition. Without hesitation, she bolted toward the music, her bare feet splashing through puddles, her clothes completely soaked. The search team followed, flashlight beams cutting through the gray curtain of rain. The old gazebo materialized through the downpour, its white paint peeling and its wooden boards creaking in the wind. As they approached, the music became clearer, a tinny sound coming from what seemed to be a small toy or music box. Tracy's pace quickened, her mother's instinct pulling her forward like a magnet. There, in the corner of the structure, a small figure sat huddled, knees pulled up to her chest. "Brooklyn!" Tracy's voice cracked with emotion as she rushed forward. The little girl looked up, her face tear-stained but otherwise unharmed. Her favorite unicorn pajamas were damp, and her hair was disheveled, but she managed a small smile when she saw her mother. "Mommy!" Brooklyn jumped up, running into Tracy's arms. The force of their collision nearly knocked Tracy over as she wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her tight enough to make up for every second of terror she'd experienced that morning. "Baby, why did you leave the house? Do you know how scared I was?" Tracy's voice trembled as she checked her daughter for any injuries. Brooklyn pulled back slightly, her lower lip quivering. "I wanted to say thank you to the nice garbage man," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He always waves at me, and yesterday he smiled when I was watching from the window. I thought if I followed his truck, I could give him a proper thank you." Delvar, who had been standing back to give the family space, felt his throat tighten. He stepped forward, rain dripping from his uniform cap. "You followed my truck just to say thank you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Brooklyn nodded, suddenly shy. "You're the only grown-up besides Mommy who notices me every week. You make me feel special." The gathered crowd, police officers, neighbors, and search team members, fell silent, moved by the simple honesty of the child's words. Tracy's tears mixed with the rain as she held her daughter closer. "But when I couldn't catch up to the truck," Brooklyn continued, "I got scared. Then I remembered this gazebo because we can see the garbage trucks from here. I thought maybe I could wait and say thank you next time." Delvar knelt down to Brooklyn's level, his kind eyes meeting hers. "That's the nicest thing anyone has ever wanted to do for me," he said. "But you scared your mama something awful. Promise me you won't go out alone like that again." Brooklyn nodded solemnly, then surprised everyone by breaking free from her mother's arms and giving Delvar a tight hug. The big man's eyes welled up as he carefully returned the embrace. The storm began to ease, and rays of morning sunlight started breaking through the clouds. As the police began to disperse and neighbors headed home, Brooklyn remained close to Delvar, chattering about her favorite Frozen songs and asking questions about his truck. Tracy watched the interaction with new eyes, seeing how naturally her daughter connected with the kindly garbage collector. The morning's terror was transforming into something unexpected, A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful relationships could emerge from the most frightening moments. As they finally prepared to head home, Brooklyn's small hand found Delvar's large one. "Can I watch for you every Tuesday?" she asked hopefully. "I promise I'll stay inside with Mommy." Delvar smiled warmly. "I'd like that very much, Brooklyn. I'll make sure to wave extra big just for you." The walk home was peaceful, the storm clouds giving way to a brilliant sunrise. Brooklyn skipped between her mother and her new friend, humming the tune that had led them to her. The community that had gathered in fear now dispersed in joy, carrying with them a story of how a child's innocent desire to show gratitude had forged an unexpected bond. As everyone said their goodbyes, Brooklyn turned to her mother with hopeful eyes. "Mommy, can we make something special for next garbage day?" Tracy looked down at her daughter, still amazed at how quickly this frightening morning had transformed into something so unexpectedly beautiful. She squeezed Brooklyn's hand and nodded. "Of course we can, sweetie. What did you have in mind?" Brooklyn bounced excitedly, her earlier ordeal seemingly forgotten. "Maybe we can make him a picture? Or cookies? Or both?" Her eyes lit up with each new idea. "I'd be honored," Delvar said, adjusting his now soaked uniform cap. "But remember, the best gift you can give me is staying safe, okay?" The little girl nodded earnestly, then turned to watch as Delvar headed back to his truck. Other sanitation workers had covered his route while he helped with the search, but he still had work to finish. Brooklyn waved until the truck disappeared around the corner, then looked up at her mother with determination in her eyes. "Mommy, I think I need more glitter for his card." Tracy laughed, relief and joy mingling in the sound. The neighborhood was coming back to life around them, people heading to work, kids walking to school, the usual morning routines resuming. But something had changed. Neighbors who normally hurried past each other now stopped to chat, united by the morning's events and the pure innocence of a child's gesture of gratitude. As they walked up their driveway, Brooklyn still planning her next Tuesday surprise, Tracy caught sight of their open back door, the portal that had started this whole adventure. What had begun as a mother's worst nightmare had somehow blossomed into a reminder of the good that still existed in the world. "Can we wait by the window next Tuesday?" Brooklyn asked, squeezing her mother's hand. "I want to make sure Mr. Delvar sees me waving." "We'll be right there, bright and early," Tracy promised, leading her daughter inside. "But first, let's get you into some dry clothes and have some breakfast. I think we both could use some hot chocolate." Brooklyn smiled, her eyes twinkling with excitement as she made an unusual request to her mother about the next collection day. Every Tuesday morning brought a new spark of excitement to Brooklyn's eyes. The sun had barely risen when she would jump out of bed, her small feet padding across the wooden floor to her closet. This wasn't just any morning, it was garbage truck day, and more importantly, it was Delvar Day. Tracy watched from the doorway as her daughter meticulously picked out her outfit, something that had become a weekly ritual since that fateful rainy morning. "Do you think Delvar will like this dress, Mommy?" Brooklyn asked, holding up a blue princess dress that had become her favorite. "He loves everything you wear, sweetheart," Tracy replied, helping her daughter with the buttons. The morning routine had transformed from a regular weekday schedule into something magical. Brooklyn would stand by the window, watching, waiting for the familiar rumble of the garbage truck. From blocks away, they could hear it coming. Brooklyn's face would light up at the first sight of the massive yellow vehicle turning onto their street. Delvar's truck was unmistakable now, decorated with children's drawings, most of them from Brooklyn herself, carefully laminated and attached to the sides. "He's here! He's here!" Brooklyn would exclaim, rushing outside with Tracy close behind. Delvar would always see her coming, his broad smile visible even from a distance as he waved enthusiastically. He'd slow the truck down, more than he did for any other house on the route. "Princess Brooklyn!" he'd call out, climbing down from his seat. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time for this special stop. Today, Brooklyn had prepared another drawing, this one showing Delvar's truck with rainbow wheels and sparkly stars all around it. I made this in art class yesterday, she explained, holding up her masterpiece. See, I drew you with a crown because you're the king of garbage trucks. Delvar carefully took the drawing, treating it as if it were a precious artifact. This is going right up on my dashboard, he declared, making Brooklyn beam with pride. He had kept every single drawing she'd given him, creating a growing collection that brightened his workday. Other residents along the route had noticed this weekly exchange. Mrs. Henderson from across the street would wave from her porch, coffee in hand, smiling at the unusual friendship. The Johnson kids started waiting with Brooklyn sometimes, fascinated by how their neighborhood garbage collector had become something of a local celebrity. Tracy often found herself taking pictures of these moments, capturing the pure joy on her daughter's face as she shared stories about school with Delvar. He listened intently, offering words of encouragement about her achievements and consolation about her challenges. You know what, Brooklyn? Delvar said one morning, reaching into his pocket. I found something special on my route last week. He pulled out a small, sparkly rock that caught the sunlight. I thought of you immediately because it looks just like the ones in your princess stories. Brooklyn clutched the rock as if it were a diamond, her eyes wide with wonder. It's magical, she declared, running to show her mother. Tracy mouthed a silent thank you to Delvar, grateful for his kindness and the way he made her daughter feel special. The community had embraced this unexpected friendship. Other parents would stop Tracy at the grocery store, sharing how their own children had been inspired to show more kindness to others. The local coffee shop even started keeping a special cup of coffee ready for Delvar's Tuesday morning stops. One morning, as Brooklyn shared her latest adventure from kindergarten, Delvar mentioned something about his own childhood dreams. You know, I always wanted to drive big trucks when I was your age. Now I get to do that and make friends like you. That's better than any dream I had. Tracy watched as her daughter's face lit up with curiosity. Really? What else did you want to be? And just like that, their Tuesday morning conversations grew even richer, with Delvar sharing stories from his own life, making their bond stronger with each passing week. As autumn turned the leaves golden, these Tuesday meetings became more than just brief stops. They were moments that the whole neighborhood looked forward to. Brooklyn would sometimes bring extras of her lunch snacks to share, and Delvar never failed to have a kind word or small treasure to share in return. One particular Tuesday, while helping Brooklyn arrange her hair ribbons before their weekly meeting, Tracy overheard her daughter studying the calendar on her wall with intense concentration. Brooklyn's finger traced the dates, stopping at a particular day, and her eyes grew wide with excitement. Brooklyn discovers that Delvar's birthday was approaching and begins planning something special. Mommy, Brooklyn exclaimed, running from her calendar to the kitchen where Tracy was preparing breakfast. Delvar's birthday is next week. We have to do something super special. Tracy smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm, remembering how she had carefully marked the date after overhearing Delvar mention it casually during one of their Tuesday conversations. What did you have in mind, sweetie? Brooklyn's mind was already racing with possibilities. She grabbed her drawing pad and began sketching with the determined focus only a 6-year-old could muster. Her tiny tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated, drawing what appeared to be a massive cake with wheels. It needs to be perfect, Brooklyn muttered, erasing and redrawing the candles for the third time. Delvar makes every Tuesday special for me. His birthday has to be the most special day ever. Throughout the day, Brooklyn continued adding to her list of ideas. During art class, she created a special card with glitter and stickers, carefully writing to the best garbage truck driver in the world in her best handwriting. Her teacher, Ms. Thompson, helped her spell the difficult words and even contributed some extra sparkly stickers for the occasion. At home, Brooklyn spread her birthday plans across the kitchen table, drawings, lists written in crayon, and magazine cutouts of cakes and party decorations. Tracy watched as her daughter's imagination soared, suggesting everything from a garbage truck-shaped cake to a parade of neighborhood kids wearing paper crowns. What about a cupcake? Tracy suggested gently. noting how Brooklyn's eyes lit up at the idea. We could make it special just for Delvar. Yes, yes, with blue frosting like his truck. Brooklyn jumped up and down, her excitement contagious. And sprinkles. He told me once that sprinkles make everything better. Word of Brooklyn's birthday planning spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mrs. Henderson offered to help bake the perfect cupcake, while the Johnson kids wanted to make a birthday banner. What had started as one little girl's desire to celebrate her friend was turning into a community event. That evening, as Tracy tucked Brooklyn into bed, her daughter was still buzzing with ideas. "Do you think he'll like it, Mommy?" she asked, clutching her favorite stuffed unicorn. "Do you think we can make his birthday as special as he makes our Tuesdays?" Tracy smoothed Brooklyn's hair and smiled. "I think having you as a friend already makes every day special for Delvar, sweetheart." Brooklyn drifted off to sleep, dreaming of birthday surprises and garbage trucks decorated with rainbows, while outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, threatening to complicate their carefully laid plans. Brooklyn sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by colorful crayons and sheets of paper, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she carefully drew yet another design for Delvar's birthday surprise. Tracy watched from the doorway, smiling as her daughter meticulously colored in what appeared to be a garbage truck decorated with balloons and streamers. "Mommy, do you think he'll like blue frosting or green better?" Brooklyn asked, looking up from her artwork. "Blue is like his uniform, but green is like his truck." Tracy moved closer, examining the various drawings spread across the table. "Why don't we do both? We could ask the bakery to make a swirl pattern." Brooklyn's eyes lit up at the suggestion. She immediately grabbed a fresh piece of paper and began sketching her new vision for the perfect cupcake. The kitchen counter was already covered with recipe books and pictures of elaborate birthday treats they'd found online. As they planned, neighbors started dropping by, each offering to help in their own way. Mrs. Henderson from next door volunteered to coordinate with other residents to ensure everyone would be present for the surprise. Mr. Peterson, who owned the local bakery, insisted on creating the special cupcake free of charge, touched by Brooklyn's dedication to making her friend's birthday special. The local newspaper caught wind of their plans through the neighborhood grapevine. A young reporter named Sarah contacted Tracy, asking if she could cover the story. Brooklyn was ecstatic at the idea of sharing their special friendship with more people. "Maybe other kids will make friends with their garbage collectors too," she exclaimed, bouncing in her chair as Tracy discussed the details with Sarah over the phone. The days leading up to Delvar's birthday were filled with secret meetings and hushed conversations. Brooklyn practiced her birthday speech countless times in front of her mirror, determined to get every word perfect. She insisted on wearing her special frozen dress for the occasion, the one she usually saved for special occasions. "Do you think he knows?" Brooklyn whispered to her mother one evening as they finalized the details. "I tried really hard not to say anything when he came by yesterday." Tracy assured her daughter that Delvar remained completely unaware of their plans. The entire neighborhood had become skilled at maintaining the secret, even the usually chatty children who would normally spill such exciting news immediately. The community's enthusiasm grew as the big day approached. Several families offered to help set up early morning decorations, and the local coffee shop promised to provide hot beverages for everyone who would gather to witness the surprise. What had started as a simple birthday greeting had evolved into a full neighborhood celebration. Brooklyn could hardly contain her excitement as she helped her mother organize the final details. She insisted on personally tying each blue and green ribbon that would decorate the street signs along Delvar's route. Her small fingers worked carefully with each bow, making sure they were perfect. "Will he really be surprised, Mommy?" Brooklyn asked for the 100th time as she laid out her clothes for the next morning. "Like, really surprised?" Tracy helped her daughter arrange her outfit, complete with the special friendship bracelet she had made for Delvar. "Sweetheart, I think he's going to be more than surprised. He's going to be overwhelmed with joy." That night, Brooklyn could barely sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind filled with images of tomorrow's celebration. She imagined Delver's smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was really happy. She thought about all the Tuesday mornings he had made special just by waving and chatting with her. Tracy checked on her daughter several times during the night, finding her alternately sleeping fitfully or sitting up in bed, rearranging the items she'd set out for the morning. The genuine care and thought Brooklyn put into planning this surprise showed just how much the unusual friendship meant to her. The alarm was set for an hour earlier than their usual Tuesday morning routine. Everything was in place. The cupcake would be delivered fresh in the morning, the decorations were ready to be put up, and the entire neighborhood was prepared to gather for the surprise. As Brooklyn finally drifted off to sleep, clutching her favorite frozen plush toy, the weather forecast playing softly on Tracy's phone warned of an approaching storm system, threatening to arrive just in time for tomorrow's celebration. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and distant thunder rumbled ominously, threatening to wash away all their carefully laid plans for the perfect surprise. The wind picked up outside Brooklyn's window, rattling the branches against the glass. She stirred in her sleep but didn't wake, still clutching her toy while dreaming of tomorrow's celebration. Tracy stood at the window, watching the approaching storm front with growing concern. She checked her phone again, scrolling through various weather apps, hoping to find a more optimistic forecast. The neighborhood group chat buzzed with worried messages. Mrs. Henderson suggested setting up a tent over the presentation area, while Mr. Peterson offered his bakery's awning as a backup location. The community's determination to make this special day happen, regardless of weather, touched Tracy deeply. She thought back to the moment Brooklyn had first conceived this plan, right after discovering Delver's birthday. Her daughter had spent weeks saving her allowance, insisting on picking out every detail herself. The cupcake had to be perfect, the decorations just right, and the timing precise. "We can't let a little rain stop us," Tracy typed into the group chat, rallying the neighbors. "Brooklyn has put her whole heart into this." Responses flooded in immediately, each neighbor offering solutions and alternatives. Someone suggested bringing umbrellas for everyone. Another proposed creating a covered pathway along Delver's route. The community's creative problem-solving showed just how much this friendship had affected them all. Tracy made one final check of the supplies laid out on the kitchen counter. The special birthday card Brooklyn had made, decorated with carefully drawn garbage trucks and hearts, the handmade friendship bracelet wrapped in tissue paper, and the detailed schedule for tomorrow morning's activities. The wind howled louder outside, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Tracy sent up a silent prayer that the weather would clear by morning, not wanting anything to diminish the joy of her daughter's thoughtful surprise. She could already picture Brooklyn's disappointed face if the storm forced them to change their carefully laid plans. Thunder crashed overhead and lightning illuminated the street, where, in less than 12 hours, they hoped to create a moment of pure magic for a man who had touched their lives in such an unexpected way. The storm intensified, but so did the community's resolve to make tomorrow perfect, no matter what challenges the weather might bring. Brooklyn's eyes fluttered open to the sound of rain pattering against her bedroom window. Her heart sank as she watched droplets race down the glass, threatening to wash away all the careful planning for Delver's surprise. She jumped out of bed and pressed her nose against the cool window, searching the dark sky for any sign of hope. "Mom," she called out, her voice tinged with worry. "It's raining." Tracy appeared in the doorway, already dressed and wearing a determined smile. "I know, sweetie, but that doesn't mean we can't make this work. Remember what Delvar always says about his route. Rain or shine, the garbage needs collecting," Brooklyn recited, managing a small smile. The community had rallied around their plan despite the weather. Mrs. Henderson from next door called to say she'd set up a makeshift shelter using her party tent. Mr. Rodriguez, who owned the local bakery, had kept the cupcake in his refrigerator overnight, ensuring it would be perfect. As dawn approached, the heavy downpour gradually softened to a gentle drizzle. Brooklyn stood by her window, watching the sky transform from charcoal gray to a lighter shade. Each break in the clouds felt like a personal victory. "Look," she exclaimed, pointing at a patch of blue peeking through. "The sky is getting better." Tracy helped Brooklyn into her special outfit, a t-shirt they'd decorated with pictures of garbage trucks and a tutu in Delver's favorite color. They spent hours getting everything just right, and even the rain couldn't dampen Brooklyn's excitement. The neighborhood was already stirring when they stepped outside. Despite the early hour, people emerged from their homes, carrying umbrellas and birthday signs. Someone had even strung up waterproof fairy lights along the fence where Delver's truck would stop. Brooklyn clutched the carefully packaged cupcake, protected in its special container. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the morning chill, but from anticipation. They could hear the familiar rumble of the garbage truck in the distance. "Places, everyone," Mrs. Henderson called out, and the small crowd arranged themselves behind the party tent. The moments before Delver's arrival felt eternal to Brooklyn. She rehearsed her birthday speech one last time in her head, wanting every word to be perfect. The truck's hydraulic brakes squealed as it turned onto their street. Delvar was focusing on his route, probably trying to work faster because of the weather. He didn't notice anything unusual until he reached Brooklyn's house. Then he saw them, dozens of people holding signs, Brooklyn standing front and center with Tracy, and a chorus of happy birthday filling the morning air. His face transformed from surprise to pure joy as he brought the truck to a stop. Brooklyn ran forward, careful not to slip on the wet pavement, holding out the cupcake like a precious treasure. "Happy birthday, Mr. Delvar," she beamed, her voice carrying clearly despite the light rain. "We wanted to make your day special because you make every Tuesday special for me." Delvar climbed down from his truck, visibly moved. The cupcake had a tiny garbage truck made of fondant on top, with a miniature Delvar figure waving from the window. The detail was impressive. Mr. Rodriguez had outdone himself. "Brooklyn, this is..." Delvar's voice cracked with emotion. "This is the best birthday surprise I've ever had." Local news crews had gotten wind of the celebration and arrived just in time to capture the moment. Cameras rolled as Delvar shared his story, explaining how what started as a simple wave to a young girl had transformed into something so meaningful. "You know," he said to the reporters, while Brooklyn stood proudly beside him, "some people might think garbage collection is just a job. But it's moments like these that remind me it's about community, it's about connection." The sun finally broke through the clouds completely, creating a perfect backdrop for photos and celebrations. Someone had brought coffee and hot chocolate, and the impromptu party continued as Delvar took a brief break from his route to celebrate with his special friend and the community that had embraced their unique bond. A video of the moment made its way onto social media, capturing Brooklyn's joy and Delvar's genuine surprise. Little did they know that among those who would see it was someone with the power to make their story even more magical. A high-ranking executive at Disney Studios was about to click play on their heartwarming celebration. The video began circulating almost immediately, with people filming on their phones as Brooklyn explained to the local news crew how she'd been planning this surprise for weeks. The moisture in the air created a subtle rainbow behind them as she spoke, adding an almost magical quality to the scene. "I wanted to do something special," Brooklyn told the reporter, "because Mr. Delvar always makes time to wave and smile, even when he's really busy." The community continued celebrating, sharing stories about how Delvar's kindness had touched their lives in different ways. Mrs. Peterson recalled the time he'd helped her retrieve her cat's favorite toy from a garbage bin. Mr. Thompson spoke about how Delvar always made sure his elderly mother's trash bins were properly returned to her garage. As the morning progressed, more neighbors arrived with impromptu gifts and cards. Someone brought a world's best garbage collector trophy they'd crafted from recycled materials. Brooklyn beamed with pride as Delvar accepted each gesture with genuine gratitude. The local news team captured every moment, from Delvar carefully eating his special cupcake to Brooklyn showing him the handmade cards she'd spent hours decorating with glitter and drawings of garbage trucks. The reporter seemed particularly moved by the story's simplicity and authenticity. "This is what community looks like," the reporter commented, watching Brooklyn and Delvar share another high five. "Sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most unexpected places." Eventually, Delvar had to continue his route. Garbage waits for no one after all, but not before giving Brooklyn one final hug and thanking everyone for making his birthday unforgettable. As his truck pulled away, Brooklyn waved until it disappeared around the corner, just as she did every Tuesday. Tracy put her arm around her daughter's shoulders as they watched the news van pack up their equipment. "You did good, sweetie," she said softly. "You made someone very happy today." Brooklyn smiled, still clutching the thank you note Delvar had quickly written her before leaving. The rain had completely stopped now, and the morning sun cast long shadows across their street. The community slowly dispersed, carrying with them the warm feeling of having been part of something special. Later that evening, as Brooklyn was getting ready for bed, the local news aired their story. But unknown to them, across the country, a much bigger audience was about to discover their heartwarming tale. The unedited social media video of Brooklyn's surprise was gaining traction, catching the attention of someone who could turn their simple act of kindness into something even more magical. Tracy's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. What had started as a simple act of kindness between her daughter Brooklyn and Delvar, their neighborhood garbage collector, had exploded into something far beyond their small suburban community. The video of Brooklyn surprising Delvar with a birthday cupcake had struck a chord with people worldwide. "Mom, we're on TV again," Brooklyn called out from the living room, where the local news was replaying the footage for what seemed like the 100th time. The shaky smartphone video captured the pure joy on Delvar's face as he received his surprise birthday gift, and Brooklyn's beaming smile as she handed him the carefully decorated cupcake. Social media platforms were ablaze with shares and reactions. Tracy scrolled through the comments, tears welling in her eyes as she read messages from people across the globe. "This restored my faith in humanity," wrote someone from Australia. "We need more stories like this," commented another from Brazil. Delvar could hardly complete his route these days without being stopped by people who recognized him. Some would wave enthusiastically, while others would approach him with tears in their eyes, sharing how the story had touched them. He remained humble, always redirecting the attention to Brooklyn's pure heart and the importance of kindness. "You know," Delvar told a reporter who had come to cover the story, "I never expected my job to bring me anything more than a paycheck. But that little girl taught me that every person, no matter what they do, has the power to make someone's day better." Brooklyn, still processing her newfound fame, sat at the kitchen table carefully reading letters that had begun arriving from around the country. Children her age wrote about how they now waited to greet their own garbage collectors, hoping to create similar friendships. "Dear Brooklyn," she read aloud from one letter, "you made me realize that friendship can happen anywhere. Now I wave to Mr. Johnson, our garbage man, every Thursday. He knows my name now, too." Tracy watched as her community transformed. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now gathered on their front lawns, sharing stories and planning ways to spread more kindness. The Tuesday morning ritual of Brooklyn greeting Delvar had evolved into an informal neighborhood gathering, with other children joining in, holding hand-drawn signs and small gifts for their favorite garbage collector. Local news stations ran follow-up stories, capturing the ripple effect of Brooklyn and Delvar's friendship. Other cities reported similar stories of children forming bonds with their local service workers, proving that kindness was indeed contagious. "It's overwhelming sometimes," Tracy confided to a journalist, "but watching how this simple friendship has inspired so many people to look beyond their differences and just be kind to one another, it makes all the attention worth it." Brooklyn took her new role as kindness ambassador seriously. She helped her mother respond to messages, drawing pictures to include with their replies. Each Tuesday, she made sure to have something special for Delvar, whether it was a drawing, a cookie, or just a new joke to share. "People keep asking me why I wanted to be friends with a garbage man," Brooklyn told a reporter, wisdom beyond her years evident in her voice. "But I never saw Delvar as just a garbage man. He was the nice person who always waved and made me smile. That's all that matters. The story continued to spread, reaching millions through social media shares and news coverage. Companies reached out wanting to feature Brooklyn and Delvar in commercials about human connection. Children's books authors asked to write about their friendship. But through it all, Brooklyn and Delvar maintained the simplicity of their Tuesday morning meetings. One evening, as Tracy was helping Brooklyn sort through the day's mail, she noticed an envelope that stood out from the rest. The return address made her pause, and she felt her heart skip a beat. A mysterious package arrived at Brooklyn's house, bearing the official Disney seal. The envelope's crisp white surface gleamed under the kitchen lights, its blue Disney logo catching Brooklyn's eye. More letters had arrived that day, dozens of them from schools where teachers had shared their story with students, inspiring classroom discussions about kindness and community. "What's happening in Seattle is amazing," Tracy said, reading from her phone. A group of elementary schools there had started a Wave Hello program, encouraging students to acknowledge and appreciate service workers in their community. The viral video had sparked similar initiatives across the country. Delver's waste management company had begun receiving calls from other cities, requesting him as a speaker for community events. His humble demeanor and genuine appreciation for Brooklyn's friendship resonated with audiences everywhere. At a recent city council meeting, he spoke about how a child's simple gesture had transformed not only his life, but an entire community. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, he told the council members. But I never felt truly seen until Brooklyn waited for me that morning with her birthday cupcake." Social media continued to amplify their story. A video compilation of children around the world greeting their local garbage collectors had garnered millions of views. Hashtags like #Brooklyn and Delver and #Tuesday. Kindness trended regularly, filled with stories of similar connections being formed in communities worldwide. One particularly touching response came from a retired garbage collector in Maine, who wrote about how he had kept every drawing given to him by children on his route over his 30-year career. "Your story reminded me of every smile, every wave, every small gesture that made my job worthwhile," his letter read. Brooklyn School had embraced the movement, starting a kindness club inspired by her friendship with Delvar. Students took turns creating thank you cards for various community workers, from mail carriers to crossing guards. The principal noted a marked decrease in bullying incidents since the club's formation. As the sun set on another Tuesday, Tracy watched her daughter carefully placing her latest drawing in a folder, a growing collection of artwork dedicated to her friendship with Delvar. The media attention might eventually fade, but the impact of their story had already set root in countless communities, sprouting new connections between people who might otherwise have remained strangers. A mysterious package arrived at Brooklyn's house, bearing the official Disney seal. Brooklyn could barely contain her excitement as she held the mysterious package in her trembling hands. The Disney seal on the corner made her heart race even faster. Tracy stood nearby, recording everything on her phone while trying to hold back tears of joy. The living room was filled with morning light, and the anticipation was palpable. "Go ahead, sweetie," Tracy encouraged, watching her daughter's eyes sparkle with wonder. Brooklyn carefully began unwrapping the package, treating each piece of tape as if it were made of gold. As the brown paper fell away, a gasp escaped her lips. Inside was a treasure trove of frozen merchandise, but not just any ordinary items. These were special edition pieces, personally selected and signed by the creative team behind the movie. There was a handwritten note that read, "To Brooklyn, whose heart is as warm as Anna's and whose friendship is as magical as Elsa's powers. Your story touched all of us here at Disney." "Mom, look!" Brooklyn exclaimed, pulling out a crystal-like snowflake ornament that sparkled in the sunlight. "It looks just like the ones Elsa makes." While Brooklyn explored her magical gifts, across town, Delvar was putting the finishing touches on his own surprise. He had spent weeks working on it in secret, wanting to show Brooklyn how much their friendship meant to him. In his garage, a custom-made miniature garbage truck sat waiting, painted in her favorite colors and decorated with hand-drawn snowflakes. The community had gotten wind of the double surprise, and neighbors began gathering outside Brooklyn's house. News vans pulled up quietly, their crews setting up cameras to capture what had become more than just a local story. It was a tale of friendship that had captured hearts worldwide. When Delvar arrived with his surprise, Brooklyn was still surrounded by her Disney treasures. The look on her face when she saw him standing in the doorway with the miniature truck was priceless. Tears welled up in her eyes as she ran to hug him. "I know it's not as fancy as your Disney presents," Delvar said humbly, "but I made it myself." "It's perfect," Brooklyn declared, examining every detail of the truck. "Look, Mom, it even has tiny trash bins." The impromptu celebration grew as neighbors brought refreshments and children gathered around to admire both Brooklyn's Disney gifts and Delvar's handmade creation. Local news reporters conducted gentle interviews, careful not to overshadow the genuine moment of friendship unfolding before them. "What does this friendship mean to you?" a reporter asked Delvar. He looked at Brooklyn, who was showing other children how to make the truck's tiny mechanical arm move. "It's changed my entire perspective on life," he answered. "Every Tuesday used to be just another workday. Now it's something I look forward to all week. This little girl taught me that sometimes the biggest treasures can be found in what others might overlook." Brooklyn overheard him and ran back to give him another hug. "You're my best friend," she said simply, and in those 4 words was the pure truth that had touched so many hearts around the world. Tracy watched as her daughter moved between her 2 sets of presents, the magical world of Disney and the heartfelt creation of her garbage truck friend. She couldn't help but marvel at how a moment of crisis months ago had transformed into something so beautiful. Other children from the neighborhood began sharing their own stories of how Brooklyn and Delvar's friendship had inspired them. One girl had started writing thank you notes to her mail carrier. A boy had begun helping the elderly couple next door with their recycling. The celebration continued through the morning, with Brooklyn insisting on showing Delvar every single item from her Disney package while proudly displaying his truck in the center of it all. She wore her new Elsa crown while sitting in the mini truck, creating a perfect blend of both worlds that had come together to celebrate her special friendship. "You know what makes these presents so special?" Brooklyn asked everyone gathered around. "They're both made with love. The Disney stuff is magical, but Delvar's truck is magical too, because he made it himself." The wisdom in her simple observation made the adults exchange knowing looks. Here was a child who truly understood that the value of a gift lay not in its origin or cost, but in the heart behind it. As the morning wore on, photographs were taken, stories were shared, and the bond between a little girl and her garbage collector friend grew even stronger. The media captured it all, but the most precious moments were the quiet ones, the whispered jokes between Brooklyn and Delvar, the proud looks from Tracy, and the genuine warmth of a community brought together by an unlikely friendship. An idea began to form among the gathered neighbors, whispered conversations speaking of something bigger, something that could help the spirit of kindness and friendship spread even further. The neighbors gathered in small groups, discussing how they could capture the essence of what they were witnessing. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the local community center, approached Tracy with excitement in her eyes. "This is more than just a beautiful friendship," she whispered. "It's a lesson for everyone about seeing the extraordinary in ordinary moments." Brooklyn was still playing with her new treasures, alternating between acting out scenes from Frozen with her new props and giving imaginary garbage collection tours with Delvar's handmade truck. She had managed to combine both presents into an elaborate story where Elsa helped collect recycling to save the environment. "And then the ice powers make everything super clean," she explained to the younger children gathered around her, waving her new Elsa wand over the miniature truck. Delvar watched with pride as Brooklyn incorporated his gift so seamlessly into her imagination. He had spent countless evening hours in his garage, carefully crafting every detail of that truck, from the tiny mirrors to the working lift mechanism. Seeing her joy made every minute worth it. "You've started something remarkable here," one of the reporters told Tracy quietly. "This story isn't just about a little girl and her garbage collector friend anymore. It's about how kindness can transform an entire community. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, but nobody seemed eager to leave. Parents brought out lawn chairs. Children organized impromptu plays featuring garbage trucks and ice princesses, and the atmosphere of celebration continued. Someone had set up a small refreshment table, and the aroma of coffee and fresh baked cookies filled the air. Brooklyn's story had touched something deep in people's hearts, reminding them of the magic that exists in everyday connections. As she sat there, surrounded by her two worlds of fantasy and reality, both made equally magical through love, a spark of inspiration hit her. "Mom," she said suddenly, her eyes bright with purpose, "I know what we should do next." Before she could share her idea, a message arrived on Tracy's phone that would take their story in an even more extraordinary direction. The community center buzzed with excitement as residents gathered for what would become a defining moment in their neighborhood's history. Banners featuring Brooklyn and Delver's story hung from the walls, their images a testament to how a simple act of kindness could spark a movement that touched countless lives. Tracy stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the packed room. A year ago, what started as a terrifying morning turned into something beautiful. Today, we're here to ensure that spirit of connection lives on. She gestured to Brooklyn and Delvar, who sat side by side in the front row, their friendship now legendary in their small town. Brooklyn, wearing her favorite Frozen t-shirt, took the stage next. Despite her young age, she spoke with conviction about the importance of kindness. "Sometimes the scariest days can bring the best friends," she said, glancing at Delvar with a bright smile. "And sometimes the people we see every day but don't really notice are the ones who can change our lives." Delver's turn at the microphone brought tears to many eyes. The usually quiet garbage collector spoke about how a little girl's friendship had transformed not just his life, but his entire perspective on his work. "Every Tuesday became special," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It wasn't just about collecting trash anymore. It was about collecting moments, building connections, and being part of something bigger than ourselves." The mayor stepped forward to unveil the Heroes Among Us program, inspired by Brooklyn and Delver's story. The initiative would recognize local workers who went above and beyond in their service to the community, with a special emphasis on connecting younger residents with these everyday heroes. Children from the local elementary school presented their own projects, inspired by the story they'd heard so many times. Each had identified someone in their community they wanted to recognize. The crossing guard who knew every child's name, the librarian who always found the perfect book, the lunch lady who remembered every food allergy and preference. As the presentations continued, Tracy watched her daughter beaming with pride. What had started as a frightening chase after a garbage truck had evolved into something that would impact generations to come. The community had rallied around the idea that every person, regardless of their job or role, had the potential to make a profound difference in someone's life. Small groups formed throughout the center as people shared their own stories of unexpected connections and moments of kindness. The local coffee shop owner talked about starting a pay-it-forward chain that lasted for weeks. A retired teacher described how she now volunteered to help sanitation workers during heavy snow days, inspired by Delver's dedication. Brooklyn and Delvar sat together, planning their next Tuesday meeting. "Maybe we could invite other kids who want to meet their neighborhood heroes," Brooklyn suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Delvar nodded, already imagining how their weekly tradition could grow into something even more meaningful. The mayor announced the creation of a community garden where people could gather and strengthen the bonds that had been formed. A plaque would stand at its entrance telling the story of Brooklyn and Delvar, reminding visitors that extraordinary friendships can bloom in the most ordinary places. As the event drew to a close, Brooklyn stood once more before the crowd. "Sometimes people ask me why I still wait for the garbage truck every Tuesday," she said, her voice clear and confident. "It's because true friendship doesn't care what someone does for a living. It cares about what's in their heart." The community center filled with applause, but it wasn't just applause for Brooklyn and Delvar. It was celebration of every small gesture, Every morning greeting, every moment of connection that made their neighborhood special. People began to understand that they weren't just residents sharing a zip code, they were participants in a continuing story of kindness and connection. Delvar shared his hopes for the future. Maybe someday every town will have their own Brooklyn and Delvar story. Not exactly the same, but their own version of discovering friendship in unexpected places. As people began to leave, carrying with them new commitments to kindness and connection, Tracy watched her daughter and Delvar planning next Tuesday's meeting. She realized that some friendships truly were eternal, growing stronger with each passing year, inspiring others to open their hearts to unexpected connections. Years later, Brooklyn, now a teenager, still waits for Delvar every Tuesday morning, proving that some friendships are truly eternal, no matter how they began. Parents who had witnessed the program's inception now brought their own children to meet Delvar, creating a new generation of Tuesday morning greeters. The sanitation department had officially incorporated community engagement into their training, using Brooklyn and Delvar's story as a model for building relationships with residents. The community garden, now in full bloom, had become a gathering place where people shared stories and built connections. Children tended to vegetables alongside retired neighbors, learning not just about gardening, but about the value of cross-generational friendships. The plaque telling Brooklyn and Delvar's story had weathered slightly, but its message remained clear and powerful. Local businesses had embraced the spirit of connection, creating their own traditions of recognition and appreciation. The ice cream shop named a flavor Tuesday Morning Surprise, and the bookstore hosted weekly storytelling sessions about everyday heroes in their community. As Brooklyn entered her teenage years, she started a club at her high school called Hidden Heroes, where students identified and celebrated the often overlooked people who made their lives better. The club organized appreciation events, wrote thank you letters, and created opportunities for meaningful connections throughout the school year. Delvar, now approaching retirement, had become a sought-after speaker at community events, sharing his perspective on how small moments of kindness could snowball into lasting change. He never failed to mention how a scared little girl's determination to thank him had transformed not just his life, but an entire community's understanding of connection and gratitude. The Heroes Among Us program had spread to neighboring towns, each putting their own spin on the initiative, but maintaining its core message. Everyone has the potential to make a difference in someone else's life, often in ways they never expect. On particularly special Tuesdays, when the morning air was crisp and the sun painted the sky in gentle colors, you could still see Brooklyn waiting by the curb, sometimes accompanied by younger children eager to learn about the tradition she had started. And Delvar, his hair now graying but his smile as bright as ever, would stop his truck, step down, and remind everyone that the greatest gift we can give each other is the simple acknowledgement that we matter. The legacy of that frightening morning had become something far greater than anyone could have imagined, a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the extraordinary impact of ordinary kindness.